Hello and welcome to another episode of the FemiNinja Project. And thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And as always, I have a fantastic guest with me today. Her name is Nichole Lee, and she is a trauma-informed multidisciplinary healer, intuitive guide, life transition coach, speaker, well-being educator, and transformative retreat curator who is recognized for her unique and holistic approach to personal fulfillment and transformation. Known affectionately as the woman who gives you your life back, Nichole is dedicated to guiding individuals, particularly those who have achieved much success, yet seek deeper meaning towards more fulfilling and joyous lives. She is also the host of the global podcast called Transcending Identity, where she engages her audience in insightful discussions about personal transcendence, transformation, and triumph. Nichole, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the show.
Cheryl, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here with you today.
What an incredible bio you have and
Thank
background.
you.
It's just like, wow. It seems like you're just a lifelong learner who never stops.
Yes, that is very true. I love learning, I love exploring, I love expanding my mind and my heart. So, yes, very much the case.
Mhm. So, how did you get into this area of intuitive healing,
Mhm.
transformation, and helping others to find more joy in their life? And I think that's so important because it's sad for me to say, but I really think that there's a lot of joy lacking in many of
Mhm.
our lives. So, just tell us
Yeah.
your story, how this all came about.
Yeah, and so true. I sense that many people are silently suffering,
Mm.
and so my journey, actually, I was in business management consulting for 20 years. And during that time, my beautiful, wonderful, gorgeous mother, best friend, was diagnosed with cancer in 2018.
Mm.
And rapid decline. Within 4.5 months, my mother passed away.
Wow.
Yeah, it was very, very quick. And during that time, I was her caretaker. So
Mhm.
I've always been tied to personal development, transformation, change. My background was in that space. But taking care of a loved one and recognizing um, the disconnect in whole being and health and wellness, particularly from a Western medicine perspective, is really where it kind of started. So, with my
Mm.
mother's diagnosis, me becoming her caretaker, and being really obsessed with trying to help heal her, I
Mhm.
recognized there was such a gap, right? In how we look at our health and wellness, to the point that I started looking at her nutrition.
Mm.
I started looking at alternative health and wellness methods around energy healing and other modalities. That's really where it started for me going down that
Mhm.
exploration, because I desperately wanted to help heal my mother.
Mhm.
Um, and so through that, with her decline, I will say the beautiful thing is, though I could not help heal or cure her from cancer, what did become very apparent is I could help heal in other areas. So my mother's eyesight became better because I took over her nutrition and
Mhm.
things around her mindset and things of that nature. Her blood pressure medication, she wasn't having to take as much of the same dosage. Her sugar, her diabetes and the sugar monitoring was changing. So it opened my eyes of like, wow, this is where there's this disconnect. We have no idea how much we can do other things in our own lives to empower ourselves to heal. So I just wanted to share that because that became very enlightening for me. With my mother passing, many people who lose a loved one, there's the element of grief, there's the element of questioning life. I
Mhm.
will say I had a spiritual awakening along with it. So, with my mother's passing, I was not only not the same physically and mentally, I was not the same spiritually. My obsession with health and wellness and healing and discovery and exploration of who I was and my purpose and being is really what brought me to where I am today.
Mhm.
And I started asking myself, who am I? Am I living by someone else's expectations for my life? If I was dying, would I be pleased with what I've contributed to the world? And it still chokes me up because the answers were I didn't know who I was. I wasn't
Mm,
really fulfilled. I was on the surface looking like I had a great life, and I would not have been pleased if I was on my dying bed with what I had contributed to the world.
mhm,
So that's where it started. And then my mother came to me in 2020 in a meditation. I started doing a lot of meditation and spiritual work and told me to quit my job.
mhm.
And within weeks, I quit. I became a consultant of the firm I was working for. And then 2021, I took the leap of faith and went down this journey that I've been on for 3 years now to
Mhm.
now help people live a fulfilling, free, joyous life because that's what I live today.
And what a ride it's been, I'm guessing.
Yes, very much a ride.
Mhm,
Several roller coasters, but I will also say that I would not change a thing.
mhm,
The level of awareness, the level of connection, but also how lucky am I to do the work that I do?
mhm,
Like, I'm like in awe of how grateful that my divine appointment is to help people be happy and fulfilled and live
mhm.
their most authentic life. So I would not
Do
change it for the world.
Do you focus on the health aspect as well? I mean, in coaching your clients, because that is
Mhm.
such a huge part of your journey, and your journey with your mother. Um, and I think that there's so much confusion, and you've listened to
Mhm.
my podcast, so you know
Yeah.
that I do talk a lot and have a lot of guests who focus on alternative health and healing,
Mhm.
and not to bash traditional Western medicine because it certainly has its place. And have two medical degrees. I was a respiratory
Yeah.
therapist, for almost 20 years, and then a PT for 20 years. And there's definitely something missing. There is definitely a
Mhm.
disconnect. And I do believe that Western medicine is slowly, it's like a great, great big cruise ship. I'll never forget being in
Mhm.
Mexico one time with my husband
Yeah.
and watching this cruise ship. This thing was so enormous, and watching it try and turn around. And it took an entire day for that ship to turn around. So that's kind of what
Mhm.
I feel like I'm seeing with Western medicine, that they're getting a little bit more accepted of alternative methods, but not fully embracing the incredible power that we
Yes.
have inside of us.
Yes, for sure. So to answer your question around do I focus on health? Yes. So that is where I would say when in the bio anymore talk about holistic, that's so important to me around your mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual health. And I do agree with you from a Western medicine perspective, particularly what I was exposed to with my mother. The way things were managed were much more on a symptom level versus a root level, right?
Mhm,
It's kind of like going in and your car has a rattle, you find out
mhm,
it's the something in the engine or something and nothing else is looked at,
mhm,
right? It's just like, let's just go there where the oil, let's change the oil, but not really looking at could there be other things that actually had it where the oil leaked, right? Was something
mhm,
else going on? And so the interconnectedness is what's so important to me when I work with
mhm,
clients because of typically how we've been traditionally taught to think about ourselves.
mhm,
If something's going on, the way I'm thinking, many times it's not like, well, what's happening in your body? Where are you
mhm,
even feeling it in your body? Can you see a correlation between
mhm,
the challenges you're having, how that's physically impacting your health?
mhm,
Or, for example, with nutrition. When I came to find, and I know you've been in the medical field, what I came to find is there's maybe one or two classes on nutrition in a 5 to 10 year span in your medical journey, right? So even with my mother, I was actually telling the doctors what she needed to eat,
mhm,
right? What foods were actually inflammatory that were not going to help her heal faster,
mhm,
right? So that is what's very interesting. And I do think to your point, the cruise ship is turning very slowly. I also think it's because we've had such a focus on how what we invest in to have data
mhm,
on what works and not works. So
mhm,
what I found, right, when we talk about some of these alternative health methods, there may not have been the same level of research, the same
mhm,
level of documentation, which then makes it very difficult to leverage in the medical field the
mhm,
way it is for
Mhm.
not just being resistant, but also the legalities tied to it, right?
Mhm.
So until we shift how we look at that from a research, documentation, experimentation perspective on
Mhm.
this, I think there's going to constantly be this challenge. The
Mhm.
one space that I found that was fascinating, that there's actually more research and more welcoming, is around things like energy healing, like Reiki, right? And there's a lot of data, particularly
Mhm.
in leveraging it from a hospice perspective, supporting
Mm.
people in their transition. So that to me was a huge step, because now saying you're a Reiki healer, that being respected in the medical field is still a step. Right,
Right.
it's still a step forward. So, yeah, so the work that I do, I'm also certified as a health coach. That actually was one of
Mhm.
the first certifications outside of life coaching my mother passed that I
Mhm.
got, obtained because of what I saw, what it was doing for my mother. So with
Mhm.
my clients, we actually have a very extensive questionnaire, and we go through
Mhm.
all those aspects. What's happening mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually in your life, so we can start looking at you holistically of what may be
Mhm.
driving some of the challenges you're having in your fulfillment and joy and
Mhm.
purpose in your
Mhm.
life.
That is so comprehensive.
Mhm.
And I love the fact that you're, highlighting this, the mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual health, because all of that is interrelated and you cannot
Mhm.
separate one from another. And that's what we do
Yes.
in Western medicine. It's like the body, the
Yes.
symptom, like you said, okay, the oil's leaking, plug it up.
Yep.
And not looking at what the root causes are. And I'm really, really curious, um, when you were talking to the physicians and saying, this is what my
Mhm.
mom, needs as far as
Mhm.
nutrition goes, how was that received?
I will say it was received well because I had done my research. I
Aha.
had done my homework. I actually had a few of, I think it was like residents, they were asking me, was I in medical school?
Oh.
Because what I decided to do was actually understand the reports of my mother,
Mm.
right? I
Mhm.
understood, I looked up words and, based on prognosis, all these things. So I was actually talking with them. I think it's always important to have
Mhm.
some backdrop and context to speak in that language. So I didn't just
Mhm.
go and say, feed my mom this. I said, based on these things and understanding the
Mhm.
inflammatory, right? Like I was speaking in that way. So that is what made them more receptive to me, because I was actually connecting the dots and I was speaking in areas that they weren't as proficient in, right? I had the
Mhm.
data
Mhm.
behind these things. So I would say with anyone, that's why I feel it's really important that we become self-empowered and
Mhm.
do the research and become self-informed so that we
Mhm.
can have that type of conversation. It became
Mhm.
us working together, right? And
Mhm.
me leveraging what I knew along with what they knew for us to do what was best for my mother. And I
Mhm.
also would say what's rare that I've seen too that was shared to me is not feeling you can be an advocate, not feeling that
Mhm.
you can actually push back on things, right? I think we've come from a culture that they know what's best, right? And
Mhm.
I would share that I've known my mother for 67 years or
Mhm.
46, sorry, because I haven't been here, but I'm just saying I know what was going on with her, right? So there's
Mhm.
information that I have that you're not
Mhm.
privy to.
Mhm.
And I think that's important as well. But it was well received,
Mhm.
surprisingly.
Yeah, I am surprised, but I am really glad that you brought that up because we do talk about this a lot on the show, the importance of educating yourself,
Mhm.
not only if you're speaking for someone else, for a loved one, a family member, but especially for yourself, when you really understand your own body and what's going on and
Yes.
some of the alternative steps that you take or some of the research that you've done, that gives you so much empowerment. So when you do bring this information to your physician or whomever, then you're actually working as a team rather than just
Exactly.
walking in, going back to the car. Mine's in the shop right now, of just dropping it off and saying, figure out what's wrong and let me know. And when
Yes,
you
for
do
sure.
that in medicine and you give somebody else that kind of authority over your healthcare and your body, that's a little frightening.
Yeah, and I would say, I mean, what I observed, because my mother was in and out of the hospital quite a bit, is I was not aware how I feel culturally we've been conditioned to have a superiority and inferiority type dynamic. When it
Mhm.
comes to lawyers, when it comes to doctors, when it comes to therapists. I mean, when you think about some of the things of they've gone and done these things. How could I possibly push back? Or
Mhm.
how could I
Mhm.
possibly provide any insight? And I think with the beauty of us having more information, that gives us that opportunity. I think at
Mhm.
one point we didn't feel we had the authority because we didn't
Mhm.
have access to the information, or it's very
Mhm.
difficult to access it, right?
Mhm.
So that was one thing that became very eye-opening to me, is like, wow, we just kind of naturally just fell into this. And until you're awakened in a way, the
Mhm.
passion I had for my mother, right, and the desire is what forced me into that. I since
Mhm.
before, even for me personally, I don't think I was being as much self-empowered or being curious or inquiring. One of the things is asking a lot of questions. I started
Mhm.
asking a lot of questions that gave different levels of clarity to be informed of the decision
Mhm.
making we were having,
Mhm.
right, around the cancer, for example, or treatments.
Mhm.
So I do think that's where the tides have shifted as well, is because you have more access. So leverage it. Now, being
Mhm.
mindful, there's a lot of things out there. So you want to be
Mhm.
cautious of not, getting too thrown off or having so much information that you're confused or scared sometimes, because there's a lot of
Mhm.
information from that. But I do think it does create a more even level
Mhm.
playing field, to have those collaborative conversations, and also,
Mhm.
like you say, that partnership that's necessary for all
Mhm.
of us in our health
Mhm.
and wellness.
Well, you're right. There definitely is a hierarchy in the medical field and in a lot of other industries as well, but especially in medicine. And, when my mom and dad were sick at the same time, it was
Oh,
very, very
wow.
strange. Yeah, they both
Mhm.
had the same type of cancer. They both had a rare form of leukemia, which in
Okay.
itself was pretty bizarre. But especially with my mother, the connection with me and my mother. Now, I do have four sisters, but when I was the one talking to the doctors and the rest of the medical staff, I mean, it was a much more in-depth and informative conversation
Mhm.
on both ends because I knew how to talk to them and I knew how to point out certain things and had a much different relationship than it was with my other sisters there. It's like, well, okay, whatever. So I was actually
Yeah.
fortunate in that way. And, even talking about doing the Reiki when my mother was, toward the last few days, I took care of her in hospice. And for her last few days, you can tell when she would get slightly agitated, she was pretty much comatose, but I would do
Okay.
something called Feldenkrais. I'm a Feldenkrais practitioner. And so I would do some of that work with her as she was lying there in the bed, and just her whole energy would shift. I mean, you could see that, her nervous system would calm down and she would just be at peace again. And it was just a
Beautiful.
wonderful gift to be able to share with her.
Yeah, and what's Feldenkrais? I'm interested. I'm
Oh,
curious. Now it's gotta be on my list of things.
Feldenkrais is, I describe it as a highly sophisticated form of neuromuscular reeducation
Oh,
based on
wow.
the scientific principle of neuroplasticity, which,
Okay.
as you know, but for
Mhm.
the listeners, simply means that our brain, our nervous system, our bodies, everything can change. It's incredibly malleable and plastic and can change during the entire course of our lifetime, that we can interrupt patterns and habits that aren't serving us well and introduce new patterns and
Mhm.
pathways by changing, the dynamics of our nervous system and our brain and the synapses and the neurons and such. And the funny thing is, it's a 4-year training program to become a practitioner. So I did that and graduated in 2009. But the funny thing is, Nichole, you're probably not going to believe this, but when I was in physical therapy school, that was my second career, we were told in all of our neurology classes, and that wasn't that long ago, it's like 25 years ago,
Mhm.
that this incredible power, this, I call it nature's miracle of
Mhm.
neuroplasticity, disappeared at the age of 14. And even I'd be sitting there in class scratching my head going, okay, this does not sound right to me, because I've spent a lot of time in the neurotrauma center working with patients when I was a respiratory therapist, and this doesn't make sense. But isn't that crazy?
So I'm not surprised, right?
Which
And
is
it just
sad.
right, it is sad, and it just goes to show what we were talking about of like your own discovery, doing your own
Mhm.
exploration, even doing experimentation on yourself, right? Because
Mhm.
again, like yes, based on what is known today, that was the truth, right? The
Mhm.
beautiful thing that we found is truth keeps reinventing itself.
Right.
Right? We are always discovering. I mean, I think about, even when we think about trauma as a declaration, I think it wasn't declared an actual diagnosis, what, until the late
Mhm.
80s,
Mhm.
right? People have
Mhm.
been severely, I mean, we know physical trauma, but as far as like trauma as it relates to, our minds and how that ties to the body and the things with the nervous system, I mean, that's quote unquote fairly new.
Mhm.
So, again, that's what's very fascinating. I mean, even on my discovery, I never thought of trauma in the way that I do now, but it
Right.
took me wanting to be curious and reading books, right?
Mhm.
And looking at the disparities that I was seeing from, this type of trauma impacts this versus what I was seeing kind of the new age or new thinking or new research. So I
Mhm.
think that's the thing that is very fascinating. Is it's really important to continue to look into those things, especially one of the things that came up for me that you were just saying, that inner wisdom, that
Yes.
that that kind of hit that you get where you're feeling like this can't be true for me.
Mhm.
Right? Or this can't be true for my parent, or something about this just isn't resonating.
Mhm.
That is the inner wisdom, that barometer that we have that many times
Mhm.
the outside world has taught us to turn off or ignore.
Mhm.
So I just think about what you said of like, that brought a sense of curiosity. It's like, this doesn't feel true to me.
Mhm.
And I would say for anyone, that's the greatest opportunity to get reconnected with yourself and
Mhm.
just see where it takes you.
Mhm.
I mean, that's been my journey, is I align way more to my inner wisdom than the
Mhm.
outer external wisdom that was given to me, right?
Mhm.
Was just we're just, hey, run this playbook.
Right?
And you're like, doesn't seem like kind of the or the script, right? That it doesn't seem to
Right.
be, I don't seem to be the main character of my story in that script.
Mhm. And I think a lot
Maybe.
of us feel that way.
Right. So yeah, I just love that you said, I wanted to pick up on that because I think many people may listen. It's like, yeah, I've had that feeling, right? And I ignored
Mhm.
it, or someone told me to just keep going. Sit with
Mhm.
it. I invite
Mhm.
anyone to just sit with it.
Mhm. I am so glad you brought that up because I do talk about that a lot too. The inner
Hmm.
wisdom and intuition, that sixth sense,
Yes.
I mean, that inner wisdom is so strong and so powerful in each and every one of us. But I completely agree with you. I think that over the years, as we mature,
Hmm.
as kids, we know
Hmm.
that wisdom and we have it. And
Hmm.
even remember when I was growing up that women's intuition was actually very much respected. And I would even hear the
Mm.
adults talking about it. The men would say, I listen to my wife. If she says her intuition is telling her something,
Wow.
then, they would go with it.
Hmm.
But then over the years, as I was growing up, it's almost like it was being weaned out of us to not trust it.
Yes.
And
Yes.
and what would be the goal? Because if you don't listen to your own inner wisdom, you don't have control over your own life, your own body, your own self, that you
Yes.
have to listen to somebody tell you what to do.
Yes. So you answer the question, right?
Well, I'm a
We don't
suspicious
control.
person.
Yeah, as soon as you were talking, I was like, that word control is going to come up, right? Because the more I have you, and I mean, even the work I do, that's part of the piece is, what of this is yours?
Mhm.
What is
Mhm.
someone else's? I mean, we talk about the YouTubes and the social media. What are you subscribing to? Did you
Mhm.
subscribe to it, or were you just auto subscribed? Right? Like,
Mhm.
and I do think that's what happens. Whether it's intentional or unintentional, there is an element that, if there's a certain things that we can control and program to have people think and feel and see the same, then it'll be easier to move them to drive their thoughts, their actions, and things of that nature, right? And I
Mhm.
do think that some of that has happened,
Mhm.
right? Um, it's come to me that, it's interesting, I just wrote this yesterday. It was like, you're not a machine, but if you're not aware, you can be programmed to act like one,
Mhm.
right?
Wow.
So I think that's what's happened. Like,
Mhm.
if I keep telling you the external world, buy the new thing, that, I mean,
Mhm.
the hair color or the dress or the new car or the new phone, like all these things, the new, like you're not enough is what starts
Mhm,
happening because we live
mhm.
in a world that's constantly telling us that something in the outside is going to fill us up.
And you know what? It just doesn't seem to be working, but that's my own humble opinion. And that I
Yes.
think is why there are so many truly unhappy, unfulfilled people living their
Yes.
lives in a way that, can be so much better and more
Mhm.
fulfilling if they just took control of their own life and just changed the
Yeah.
script. So tell us how to do
Yeah.
that.
Well, I think just even this conversation that we're having, there's a desire for greater awareness is the first place to start, right?
Mhm,
To become the owner of our own lives is a
mhm,
decision that you desire to go into spaces of curiosity.
mhm,
If you're not in a space that you want to become curious and explore, it will be difficult for you to own your own
mhm,
life.
mhm,
Um, and so that's the first place that I invite anyone to start. And if that feels very uncomfortable, if that feels scary, because also being trauma informed, I recognize that going to some of those spaces can be very daunting or paralyzing for people.
mhm,
So I invite you to have someone that's on the journey with you.
mhm,
It does not always have to be a therapist. It can
mhm,
be a friend, it can be a pastor, it can be a counselor, a mentor, someone you feel safe enough that also is capable enough to
mhm,
support you in that journey. And curiosity can be things like journal prompts.
mhm,
You know, what are the things one of the things I ask clients is to go back in their childhood if they're comfortable. What lit you up? What did bring
mhm,
you joy? What
mhm,
was that toy or the toys or that you love to do? What were things that you, without even thinking, you would just always gravitate towards? You know,
mhm,
that's something I ask. And when you start to see the light bulbs go off and the excitement come back, and then you start
mhm,
asking, what shifted? Because what you just mentioned, right? Some time at a child, we had that. What shifted? Then you start to see the interconnection between either loved ones or circumstance
mhm,
that took you in a different direction,
mhm,
right? So I always invite individuals to do that. Whether journal prompts is one, you can also do timelines. So taking chunks of your life and looking at where you had joy and pain,
mhm,
or joy and unhappiness, or shifts in your life that you felt were very significant from a positive or not so positive perspective.
mhm,
Because as you do that, you get more self awareness to start to
mhm,
see where there's the interconnectivity of the things that are happening in your life.
mhm,
That to me is where you actually start to become more empowered to
mhm,
have information that may have been suppressed or just what's the word I'm looking for? Dormant,
mm,
because you just haven't gone through this type of
mhm,
exercise in many
mhm,
years, right?
mhm,
So those are two things that I highly recommend starting to do to start just connecting the dots. And
mhm,
then the other I would say is starting to actually look at what your strengths, your talents, and your gifts are. And if that's challenging for you to do, because sometimes culturally we don't like to talk about ourselves, pick 3 to 5 people that you trust, that you love, that
mhm,
will be honest with you, and ask them,
mhm,
what are the things, what are the strengths you see in me? What are the talents or skills that I do better, say, than someone else, or you just notice I naturally pick up? And for me, gifts are those things that you can't explain that you just do
mhm,
so well. So
mhm,
someone saying, "You just do this so naturally, and it's so difficult for me to do, but you just have a knack at it."
mhm,
You'd be surprised at how many things you had not connected about your own power because you hadn't done it in that way.
mhm. I am so glad you started with self-awareness. I'm just all over that.
Mhm,
However, like you said, it can be daunting. It can be really intimidating when people think about taking a step back and really looking at themselves in an honest way. That can be really overwhelming.
mhm,
So if somebody's listening to this going, "I don't wanna do that because I'm afraid of what I'm going to find."
Yes, for sure. Yeah. And that is very natural. And that's where I do say that, you know, having a person that can be along the journey with you, I think is
Mhm,
very helpful. And I think that's for all of us, right? We
mhm,
all desire community and connection and
mhm,
safe spaces. And so it is very natural, particularly with all the things that have happened in the world. Just us all going through the trauma of the pandemic
mhm,
has heightened people's nervous system, higher sensitivity, dysregulation, all the things. So it would be very natural to say, hey, I've been able to kind of work in this way and it's working for me from even a coping, being able to cope. What typically
mhm,
happens when an individual doesn't even want to start that is knowing that they are using the little bit of fuel they have right now
mhm,
just to keep going.
mm.
Right? So I think we have to acknowledge that it's not always that I don't want to, but if I'm on, like they say, if I'm on fumes, right?
Yeah.
Like I've just got enough to get up every day. We have to
Mhm,
acknowledge that. And so if you are in that space as well, I invite you, if it's 1 minute,
mhm,
to even acknowledge the joy in your life or what lit you up in that day is a way to start to look at the joy in your life.
mhm. I'm glad you brought up the nervous system and dysregulation because when that does happen and you're living basically, and I think a lot of us are in the sympathetic nervous system,
Yep.
so we're just so
Survival mode.
ratcheted up, hyper, just our hyper, what's the called vigilance.
Hypervigilance, yep.
Yep, yep. And I think we're all doing that. And our nervous system never has the time to regulate itself again. And I love the fact that you brought up the just the 1 minute. And
Mhm,
it just reminds me of the quote, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a simple step or a single step.
mhm.
So just
Yes.
taking that 1 minute and celebrate the fact that you took that minute and you can even as if you're journaling write that down or I don't journal but I sometimes do just like a mini diary. Oh, I did this
Mhm,
today and so I can keep track
mhm.
of some of my activities so I know, oh well, that's why I'm tired or this is why I feel this way. Just write that down, put it down on a
Yeah.
piece of paper on your calendar and celebrate the success of 1 minute. You took the time to do that and notice how different you feel when you
Yes.
do.
I love that. I love that, and I will just add to that, because I think even like you were saying with the journaling and the writing and all these, different things that are out here for individuals to do, it's part of it is finding the thing that does feel good to you to do.
Mhm.
So I have clients that the writing feels paralyzing.
Right.
So, it's very interesting because it also, again, depends on your environment or your experience or your situation, right? So, um, some it's the writing for me. I find that writing works really well. And with others, I just say do a voice note,
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
Just as you're walking. Because I think the other thing is sometimes like, where's the time and where am I fit it in, right?
Mhm.
Maybe it's a voice note that just says like, wow, I just felt really good about X.
Mhm.
It might not even be the minute, right? But like capturing it that way. I have clients that love that are very creative. They
Mhm.
doodle. They
Mm.
draw bubbles or they draw a
Mhm.
heart and or a happy face, right? I just did a retreat recently and we used stickers. So
Hmm.
I bought all these stickers with all these different sayings and things, and women picked out the stickers. So maybe you're a person because I think the other
Mhm.
thing that comes, particularly with adults, everything feels like work.
Right?
Right? So, we don't even call it homework, and I'm like, "What's your play work? What's your
Right.
playtime?" Right? So, you might even say, "That just feels like work," and again, that's that tension, right? The fight or flight situation.
Mhm.
So, maybe you buy stickers on Amazon for 12 bucks,
Mhm.
and they have all these positive words or whatever or affirmation cards, and you just go through them, and you
Mhm.
pick the one that feels good to you today,
Mhm.
that aligns
I
with you.
I absolutely love that because I mean, you think of children. They love
Mhm.
stickers. I mean, what kid does not love stickers? And even sometimes, when I'm writing out, my bills or whatever, or sending cards in the mail, put the little sticker on, my return
Mhm.
address and the stamp, and it just makes
Yeah,
me kind of
makes you
smile. And it
feel
goes,
good.
yeah, and it goes back to being a child. What were those things that made you happy? And that's why I
Yeah.
love the sticker situation. I mean, that's a
Yeah.
wonderful,
Yeah,
what a great
thank
idea.
you. Well, the other thing I thought of, so, in my retreat, we had different themes, and one was the joy, and we actually even did crafts because, again, to your point, there's some shift of when you're a child, be fun and free, and all things are possible, right? You can be a superhero and a doctor, and, you can color outside the lines, and
Hmm.
you could wear a green t-shirt and purple pants and striped socks. Like, you think about all these wonderful things of feeling liberated and free, and then the world says, "I'm sorry, you're an adult. You can't do that anymore." And so, what I've come to find is if you can find play, if you can go back into that space, it will also help you start to shift the difference between the stressful world you're in
Hmm.
and this new world you're creating. Because
Hmm.
sometimes if there's a correlation, be too much of a correlation between them,
Hmm.
that's actually what stalls you or paralyzes you from wanting to do the work. But if we
Mhm,
shift it into something fun, you're looking
mhm,
forward to that minute or those 5 minutes, right? To go
mhm,
through the stickers or to doodle or whatever, and
mhm,
know that it's just yours. It doesn't even
mhm,
have to be shared with anyone, and it's
mhm,
your playtime.
mhm.
So, that's just something I've come to realize that, like, so much feels like the work, and it's like, I'm tapped out. I
Yeah,
don't wanna work
right.
anymore. I get you want me to work on myself, but I just worked a 14-hour day, right? And I was just
Right.
in board meetings and doing presentations, and or even as a creative, even with them doing it in a different way, maybe you're using I have a client, we use Play-Doh
Oh, fun.
because they weren't able to use Play-Doh as a child, and being able to use Play-Doh as adult actually brought them back into their power,
Wow, that's
right?
awesome.
So, yeah, creative things.
Yep, I love the idea of play, and believe it or not, that's a term that we use a lot in the martial art that I practice.
Yes,
It's, let's
awesome.
play, and when I first started training at the age of 47, I would and Sensei would say, "Okay, let's play," and I'm like, "There's nothing about this that seems like play. If this guy wants to attack me right now, that doesn't seem like play to me." But when you do look at things that way, it changes your whole attitude and your entire
Yeah.
outlook, and I also have to laugh at the we got to color outside the lines. And then all of a sudden, we go to school and we have to not only color within the lines, we have to function within
Yes.
those lines as well. And I tell a lot of my clients and my students that it's amazing when we were children, babies.
Mhm.
How did we learn to move? Nobody gave us little baby barbells and said, do these 10 reps, put one hand here, another hand here, move your hip like this, and then you're going to be able to roll over in your crib. No,
I'm very visual, I'm sorry, something is
isn't
baby
that
barbell.
funny? Yeah, but it's like, we
Yeah.
figured it out on our own. And that's
Yep.
how we learned how to move in our environment by exploring our bodies, our movement, our environment. It was all very curious and interesting and the element of play and every milestone we achieved, the adults were
Yeah.
clapping, "Bravo, this is wonderful."
Stars, everything.
Great, yeah, until we were fully upright, ambulatory, and independent, that's when we were told to sit down and shut up because now
Yep.
you're in school and you have to learn.
Yes.
And our
And you
whole
have to learn the same way.
right, and that organic way of learning was just gone.
Yep. Removed. Yep.
Mhm. Just like our intuition, it was weaned out of us. So yeah, I'm all for taking that power back, taking that playfulness and that
I
sense of
love
interest and
it.
curiosity.
And I
Ditch
love
the
that you
baby
shared.
barbells.
Yes. I'm such a visual person. I apologize for interrupting, but I'm literally seeing little baby. But yeah, I love that you shared that about your journey and what you offer. Yeah, it just comes to me. And that's why I use the word joy even over
Mhm,
happiness. I love happiness, but joy just it feels different, you know?
mhm,
And when I look at a baby, I see the joy in them. I see the
mhm,
light. And I think that's what we're talking about, right? Is that we don't realize over time, and I think this is why even when we think of things like midlife crisis, I'm not
mm,
sure it's really a midlife crisis. I just think it's the compounded effect of your light being
mhm,
dimmed. And at certain point in
mm,
time, it's so dim that you
Mhm.
rise up to recognize that
Mhm.
it's almost out,
Yeah,
right?
that flame is burning out.
Right. So similar we're talking about, it's recognizing too and giving yourself that loving and passion that has been compounded. No one's really told you to unpack over time or to reflect over time or
Mhm.
to even give yourself time to sit and be free. I mean, we think about the word vacation, it's to vacate something. Right? Most people are vacating their lives because they're to come back to the same stressors, right? So if we
Mhm.
don't consciously shift to say, when is my playtime that truly, or my time for me, that isn't an escape, it's an
Right.
exploration, then we will
Mhm.
constantly be in escapism type behavior.
Mhm. I think that in some respects or some aspects that that type of self-reflection, um, at least in the era that I grew up, I mean,
Hmm.
I'm 40 or I'm 20 years older than you, but
Hmm.
that would be considered being selfish.
Yes.
Because to take time for ourselves in that way, when we should be taking care of other people, we should be,
Yes.
doing other things and, not wasting our time being introspective and self reflective, because that would just be considered vain and a waste of time and selfish.
Yes. And I would say, Cheryl, like, even with the difference in age, I would say there's still some of that in this day and age, even though I
Mm,
think what's interesting is we have more access and messaging
mhm,
around taking the time, sitting still,
mhm,
meditation, like all the things that
mhm,
weren't necessarily just fully available or visible to everyone.
mhm,
I would say I'm still finding that people are still feeling guilty about that. I do
mhm,
still think, depending on what you've been exposed to, depending on your
mhm,
traditions, your cultures, there's a lot of variables that still have individuals feeling as though it is selfish to take a break.
mhm.
I'm even seeing it with young people who are
Wow.
tied to whatever the definition of success is, are
Mhm.
still feeling that they can't stop and reflect and sit. There must be something they have to do. So I
Wow.
think it's a issue across the board, whether you're 10 or 110, that there's
Mhm,
still this element. And I think particularly, quote unquote, around what success is defined as in people who are successful, of
mhm,
how much you can do that.
mhm. Because eventually the dam will break.
Right. Exactly. And once again, it's how we're defining success, right? But I
Mhm,
think from some of the external factors around what that looks like, there's still very much a grind and hustle and
mhm,
sacrifice and, put other people, whether it's your employees or other people before you, or sometimes from a legacy perspective, I have to carry this burden so that the people before, after me don't. I mean, there's a
mhm,
lot of different intricacies to that. And then there is the cultural element of, and I would even experience this with the work that I'm doing from a spiritual perspective, feeling guilty that that's now my job, right? And that
mm,
I also can hold boundaries to that. I don't always have to be in a healing, guiding, loving space. I have the opportunity to shut off, and that's the
mhm,
part I had to work on, Cheryl.
mhm,
Like, I actually can be selfish, it's not being self-care is not selfish, but actually saying, "You know what? I can create boundaries. I
mhm,
don't have to be that for all people just because that's my
mhm,
assignment. I actually can go away and retreat and cut it off, or even
mhm,
tell someone, I can't be that for you right now."
mhm. I was 50 years old when I learned boundaries.
Mm,
I learned how to say no, and it took that long. But when I did, the whole world, I mean, my whole world just turned upside down. It
game
was just,
changer.
oh my gosh. I mean, like a 50-pound weight was removed from my head, which this is fascinating. I used to have incapacitating, excruciating headaches. Huh, they went away.
Go
Go
figure,
figure.
Cheryl, because we didn't just look at, oh, there's a headache, take medicine. It's like, let's look at all of you, Cheryl.
Mhm,
Maybe
mhm.
because you're carrying all this energetic weight and stress.
Mhm, mhm, exactly. Maybe because you're being a doormat, that might be it
Yeah,
too.
maybe because you've been stopped. Well, I just say so it's interesting, like, I look at that as, like, whether it's I guess it's just visually how we look at things, right? Like,
Mhm,
doormat or carrying like, yes, of
mhm,
course, if you've been the person carrying everything on your back or your
mhm,
shoulders or everyone stomping on however you wanna look at it, and you wonder why you're having the issues, for sure, and I
mhm,
think too, aligned to that is the pieces around for me of getting into the asking the questions around what types of experiences created that,
right,
right? Like what part of me felt that I had to be all of that. And I
right,
actually had to look at what part of me felt that I was, from an ego perspective, should be saving everybody.
right, right.
Right. So there was a two part, like, oh, I'm so, but who am I to think that I'm everyone's savior?
Mhm, mhm.
Right. Like,
That boy, that's a heavy
I
burden.
I probably need to check myself because am I really that special? Like you're like, hmm. But I so align with you on that. And I just learned that truly boundaries over the past. So I'm 46. So what was that, 43 or 44? And
Mhm,
I would say last year is really when I aligned
mhm,
to it and committed to it. So I think the thing with just even us talking about age that I think is important for individuals to connect with is we are all on our own unique
mhm,
journeys,
mhm,
and we will learn and explore and heal and connect and um get through whatever our elements of clarity or even our purpose and
mhm,
our meaning at our divine point in time.
mhm,
And I love how you and I are talking about this and just saying, it can happen here, it could happen at
mhm,
14, it could happen at 25. Honoring your journey is so
mhm.
important. And we live in a world that there's
Oh,
so much comparison that if we don't create that boundary for ourselves,
mhm,
we will constantly be looking again outside to say, well, wow, Cheryl got it at that. I need to,
mhm.
why aren't I there? Why haven't I
Right,
arrived?
right.
So that's just something just based on listening to this conversation with us, like honor your journey. I don't
Mhm,
think I would have even been in the position to serve the way I was if it happened at 30 or 35.
mhm,
It was divinely aligned that it's happening now,
mhm.
right?
Well, I think it's interesting too because I think people are used to looking at somebody else and doing that
Mhm.
comparison. They see the finished product.
Yes.
They have no
Yes. No
idea.
idea.
They have no idea what it took to get to where they are at that point in time.
Yes.
And I'm
And
sure it's never been a smooth ride.
no, never. And I would say too, the thing that we sometimes forget too is there's one area that you may be seeing that I
Mhm,
may have arrived. There's other
mhm,
areas that I'm working on that you may have arrived. This is why we need each other, right? If
mhm,
we're all at the same level at the same time, the whole point of us coming together in community and supporting and loving each other wouldn't be there. Right? So I
mhm,
think it's also honoring that just what you see on the surface doesn't mean there aren't other elements that I'm working on that I can see where you can support. I always say
mhm,
there's the master and the student at all times, right?
mhm,
Like the
mhm,
student or the student and the teacher at all times. So I
mhm,
think that's something too to be mindful of when we're looking at other individuals is we're all individuals on different journeys and we all have
mhm,
something to offer to each other. It's just
mhm.
different.
I love the fact that you said why we need each other, because that's another reason why I do the podcast, is
Mm,
because I really believe that the power of sharing our stories, telling our
yes.
stories, not to compare
Mhm.
ourselves with each other, but it just creates such powerful conversations and really strong bonds of restoring human dignity. That's one of the things that,
Yes.
I think is really missing in the world right now. And so
Mhm.
that is a really nice segue into your podcast. So tell us about your
Yes.
podcast.
Yes, and so that connection we talk about, yes. So my podcast is Transcending Identity. And how it came about for me was recognizing how much we get stuck and some of the things we talk our identities or beliefs or even environments that hold us back. So
Mhm,
transcending identity is all about sharing these stories about
mhm,
how individuals have transcended or triumphed over those
mhm,
particular areas.
mhm,
So it's such a beautiful opportunity to create that sense of community and connection. And I think what it does, and just what your podcast does, is recognize you're not alone,
Mhm.
and that these these stories that you may not have expected by a certain person are what you connect to. I think it
Mhm.
goes to show the human essence of us, and we get so stuck in maybe how someone looks or their age or their background. But when you listen to the human essence of the stories, you start to realize we have so much more in common in the human
Mhm.
experience. And that's
Mhm.
what's been so beautiful about it, is really getting back to who we are as humans and
Mhm.
recognizing that it's through these stories that we have hope and faith and belief
Mhm.
that it's possible for us,
Mhm.
that it really is. So that's what my podcast is about, is sharing those stories as well.
Mhm. Excellent. And where can they find the show?
Yes, so on my website, which is Nicole, Nichole, Lee.love. You
Mhm.
can access the podcast there, or you can find it on all podcast platforms. So
Mhm.
Apple, Spotify, Google, all the things, just by
Mhm.
searching by my name, Nichole Lee,
Mhm.
or Transcending Identity.
Well, and I love the fact that you put .love
Thank you.
on all of
Yes, you get a
that.
touch of love every time you connect with me.
Aw, that's so awesome. So how
Thank
can
you.
people connect with you, work with you? Do you have consulting? I know you
Yeah.
do the what is it, the retreats? Tell
Mhm.
us about all of that.
Yes, so I offer one-on-one coaching and experiences. So it's really around the experience you want to create on your journey to fulfillment. And I also provide consulting in the wellness space from
Mhm.
that perspective, and also provide, yes, retreats. And so all of that information can be accessed on my website. From a
Mhm.
social media perspective, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I
Mhm.
am Nichole Lee. And on Instagram, I am Nichole Lee.
Mhm. Excellent.
Yes.
Nicole, thank you so much for being on the show. This has been a fantastic conversation, and I've just loved meeting you and talking to you. And I really believe we are very much aligned.
Yes. Sure. I'm so thankful for this. And I am just so appreciative to the work you're doing and how you're helping humanity stay connected and feel loved, seen, and heard. And I'm grateful to be a contribution to your mission. So thank you.
You are welcome. And do you have, before we finish and wrap
Yes.
up, one final little pearl of wisdom? You have shared so much information with us, but
Hmm.
if there's one little pearl of wisdom that you can leave us with to give the audience something to think about.
The greatest gift you can give to the world is being your authentic self.
Oh, beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Thanks,
Thank you.
Nicole.
Thank you.
Everybody, thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate you. Oh, please do share this episode with everybody you know. Let's try and make this world a much better place
Mm.
just by sharing stories and giving each other a lot of love, hugs, and support. Because if we are on this journey together and we support and love each other, the world is going to be a better place.
Mhm.
And that is my hope and prayer. I really do want world peace.
Yes.
And that is the way of the FemiNinja.